We're on.
Lord Jack McConnell, former Minister of Scotland and a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, thank you very much for joining us, and we really appreciate your contribution in the conference. We have a couple of questions for you, starting with...
Hello, we appreciate that you're here. And the first
I
question...
appreciate you having me.
Thank you. As part of the House of Lords, politician and civilian, are you presently involved in developmental work, and how are you pushing for the UN Sustainable Global Goals?
Yes, I probably spend most of my time working on conflict and development because the two are so closely linked. I believe very strongly that you can't have sustainable peace without development, but also that you can't have sustainable development without peace. So I think the two go hand in hand. So although I've been campaigning a lot this year on the Sustainable Development Goals, both trying to raise the profile of them in the UK, get the UK government to have a good strategy for implementing them and supporting their implementation elsewhere. I've also been making the case very strongly that the goals have to include a commitment to peace and to justice and strong institutions in Goal 16, because in many countries without that, then the rest of the goals will be entirely meaningless because the conflict itself will wipe them away.
That's true. And now regarding the cultural diplomacy, since we're reunited here because of that, cultural diplomacy is necessary to address gender inequality and women's education in many countries. And how has this been approached in your community and places that you have influenced at?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, in Scotland, I was very proud that in our new Parliament in 1999, the Labour Party, not all of the parties, but the Labour Party, which was the biggest party at that time, elected 50% of our new members of the Parliament as women and 50% as men. And I think it changed the tone of the Parliament. It made the Parliament, I think, a much better institution. And that commitment has now, worked at a number of levels. So that kind of thing has been important at home over the years, as well as a lot of individual policies for gender equality. But I think that increasingly around the world there is a recognition that gender equality is fundamental for peace and for development. And that one of the reasons that a lot of peace agreements have not been sustained is because not enough women are involved in agreeing them and in their implementation. They tend to be agreed in little private rooms somewhere by the men, and then not everybody feels empowered by that. And I think women have a much better way of doing things. And I mean, these are generalisations, but I think globally we need more women involved in peace negotiations and the implementation of peace agreements. But also in development, I think everybody now accepts that it's true that women are the key drivers of development. That in the community, the family and the community and in elected representation, that the leadership of women is fundamental to genuine development. And I think given that is now accepted, I'm delighted that the Sustainable Development Goals include a clear commitment to gender equality. I think that's going to be a big challenge in a lot of countries because of the cultures that you are expressing. But I think the more that the global community stands with women in individual countries who are trying to make change, the more empowered those women become, and the stronger and more confident they will be. And change will have to happen.
Yeah. Okay, we have a few more questions for you.
I thought so.
Following gender equality, considering that Saudi Arabia just had its first election for female politicians, do you think that this will influence gender equality in the region?
I think it's bound to make, even if it is a relatively token measure at this stage, it's bound to have an impact, I think, elsewhere in the region. But it's still not enough, and we need to be clear and honest about that. I think we need to respect individual countries' right to make their own decisions, and I do. And we need to respect that sometimes changing traditions can take some time. But I don't think those of us who believe in a more equal world and who believe in equality before the law for everybody, male and female, should be willing to concede on that principle, just because of the traditions in particular countries. So, I believe very strongly, and I would have a number of other criticisms to make of the regime in Saudi Arabia, but I think in particularly in the developed world, particularly in what was previously the West, I think we have been at times complicit in the ongoing position of women and others in Saudi Arabia, and it is time for us to take a much firmer stand on that. And I think the more consistent we are, the more likely that further changes will come.
Okay, this flows into my next question. How can cultural diplomacy enable understanding between women's rights and those cultural values that degrade women?
Well, I think cultural diplomacy and cultural understanding can help us promote the case for equality and for an end to discrimination, and in particular for an end to violence against women, which tends to go hand in hand. I think cultural understanding can help us to persuade and promote change. I think too often cultural understanding, as the underpinning of cultural diplomacy, can lead to no action, because people say, oh, it's a cultural issue. The global community and regional leaders, particularly in Northern African countries, took an approach to this that was to say that it was just it was like almost a religious practice or a traditional practice that nobody should do anything about. And I think that gradually, particularly over the last 10 years, there's been an increasing international focus and a national focus and now a community focus in many countries on this, and that communities are voluntarily agreeing to give up the practice and are working in the community to actually end this horrific violent abuse of women. And I know that inside the UK, the police and other authorities, doctors and others, were for years not willing to report or challenge this behaviour. And I made a speech in Parliament just 2 years ago where I said, if I cut my daughter's finger off, I would be in jail.
Yeah.
And people are cutting the parts of young girls and getting no action against them. It's just unacceptable. And the fact that it has become part of the culture in some countries and communities doesn't make it acceptable. But that cultural, understanding the cultural origins of the practice and the cultural significance of the practice helps us then advocate change.
Yeah, I actually met this woman in Kenya who's from a Maasai tribe, and they actually commit genital mutilation.
Yeah.
And she said that the little girls in the society started turning to her for help because she was against it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really resonated in my mind was all of the elderly men went to her husband and said, "How can you let your wife do this? You're supposed to control your woman."
Yeah.
And he actually told them, she does what she wants. She's the one wearing the pants in the relationship, But I think, building bridges between cultures can enable a change in mentality and just necessarily the placement of women as well as the positions that women can actually have.
I think also we need to, and I think sometimes for want of a better description, the West, the developed world, the liberal, secular developed world, can appear to be preaching about some of these issues. And we need to be, I think, a little bit more humble in the way that we do this. I think it is all right, for politicians, for campaigners, advocates for change to be doing that advocacy and trying to persuade and change particularly the way that women and girls are treated in different parts of the world. But we also need to admit our own deficiencies as well. It was interesting listening to former Prime Minister Zapatero on Friday night. It was less than 10 years ago that he was changing laws in Spain that discriminated between men and women on dependency and on other issues. So, our traditions and some of our practices and behaviours today in the developed world are not what we are preaching to others about. So I think we need to be a little bit more humble to admit our own mistakes, and we'll be listened to better if we behave like that.
Okay.
Well, I think most, maybe all, reasonable politicians in the world today recognise that climate change is serious. I think there are some on the extremes who try and deny it, so occasionally you have a situation where a political party is led by people who are a little bit scared of those on those extremes, and how much support they might generate. So they tend to maybe water down what they say about it. But I do think, at least privately, responsible leaders all over the world know this is a problem, and I think that's been driving the decisions in Paris this week. The second problem, though, I think for all political leaders, and this is true in the developing world as well as the developed world, is that implementing decisions to tackle climate change is expensive and it's not easy, and it's long term. So there is no, apart from being seen to do the right thing, for a politician, there is no immediate public benefit in tackling climate change. In fact, it can be the other way around, because some of the measures will cost money, some of the measures might restrict the behaviour of citizens. So I think tackling climate change is difficult for politicians. And that's, although the agreement in Paris this week is not perfect, that's why I'm really delighted that there is now actually an agreement, because I don't think reaching that agreement was easy.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Sorry. It's just about in third world countries right now, many politicians and presidents are mostly worried just about their GDP, about their economy and their development, but they are forgetting about the environment. For example, my president right now, he wants to open a nuclear plant, and he's actually making plans for it. How can the UN and the rest of the countries help to change this mindset of our countries?
Money over ecology.
Yeah. I think the best way to change these mindsets is in the country itself, with the population. I think increasingly we see around the world democratic elections that change governments. This is still a relatively new thing in a lot of places. But peaceful change of government through elections is becoming more and more the case in many places, and we've seen some challenges to that in Kenya, for example. But so also some relative progress in making that happen, and in South America also. We see in some countries the potential to change a government through elections. So public opinion becomes important then.
Yeah.
So I said in my comment this morning on the panel, absolutely, as well as this fundamental principle of men and women being equal before the law and everybody being equal before the law, it seems to me that fundamental principle that you can vote out a government, not just vote for a government, but that you can vote out a government that's doing something you don't want it to do. That is to me is a fundamental human right.
Yeah.
It is part of what we should all be capable of, and we should have no compromise on that. And in the countries in the world where it's not possible, we should be advocating change. And in the countries where it is possible, then the people themselves need to take up these causes and fight for their corner.
Yeah, civil society.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.